Thank you very much, Professor Pauline Deutz. We'll start with this section 1 of this conference. Well, this session is very much focused on organizations and circular economy. And that's the main topic for this session. A key area in circular economy is organizations and circular economy. Next slide, please. The session will be mainly divided in 3 parts. The 3 parts, or 3 main topics, if you prefer. The first one will explore the practices in circular economy at the organizational level. And to explore this topic, we have a main question that we want to answer. And the question is, what is the current practice of circular economy in public sector and private sector organizations? And to answer to this question, we have 2 speakers, Natasha and Ana Dias. The second part of this session will explore a different angle, fundamental angle for organizations and circular economy. And that angle is very much related with engagement. And our engagement, it's a main driving force for circular economy at organizational level. And to explore this topic, we have a second question. The question is, how can public and private sector organizations increase their engagement with the circular economy? And again, to answer to this question, we have 3 speakers. We have Tomas, Stefania, and Enrique that will explore this question. And finally, we will finish this session, this morning session, the first session, with the third angle of these organizations and circular economy. And that angle is very much focused on assessment and circular economy and sustainability assessment. And to address this topic, we have the last question that we want to answer, and we will try to cover with 3 speakers. The question is, how can the sustainability of circular practices be assessed? And to answer to this fundamental question, we have 3 speakers. We will start with Eric, and then we'll have Anna, and finally, Kathleen. Next slide, please. So we will start soon with our key speakers for this morning session. So the first part of the session, as I said already, is very much oriented to practices. And to talk about practices and circular economy, we have the 2 speakers that I already mentioned. We will start with Natasha Klein and then Ana Dias. So if you are ready, Natasha, please open your mic and start. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Tomas. Good morning, everyone. So as Professor Tomas said, my name is Natasha Klein, and I'm from Nova University, Lisbon. And I'll share with you some of our research on circular practices in the public sector. So next slide, please. Okay. So research on this topic has been relatively overlooked at organizational level compared to research in other sectors, such as the private sector, for instance. And so there is a need to generate insight on what's going on in public sector organizations regarding circular engagement, apart from the work on public policy. And so we found that public sector organizations are at initial stages of circular practice. There are some circularity evidence, even though not necessarily undertaken in the context of circularity efforts. But we found circularity evidence in several areas. So in public procurement, to start with, where circular criteria are integrated in green public procurement procedures, or where there's an effort to change the way procurement is done, to purchase performance or services instead of the products themselves. And then there's also circularity evidence in internal operations, reducing consumptions of paper, and plastic, reusing and sharing equipment. There's also evidence of dematerializing administrative processes. And finally, there's also efforts in optimizing public buildings in terms of water and energy efficiency, for instance. Next slide, please. Okay, so we done this research mainly in the context of Portugal as a case study. And so we interviewed several people in central public sector organizations in Portugal as public employees. And we found out that circular economy transition is understood as a slow process that is undertaken over time, where small changes are recommended to be introduced in daily activities to enable a change in mindsets, behaviors, and cultures around the use of resources. So we've seen that there is an awareness of circular economy as a resource management issue of products, materials, but also that there is this awareness of there's a need for a more transformative way, also human-based, social-based, where there's also a need for changing people, the way they behave, and the culture around it. Next slide, please. Okay, so finally, looking at the circular economy implementation in the public sector, we've identified amongst others, three main barriers that are characteristic to the public sector. So the first one is that the public sector is characterized by a relatively bureaucratic culture with tendencies towards long-established rules, a certain extent of conformism that might hinder innovative change. And so that could be addressed with emphasizing on awareness raising or on investing in green human resource management strategies. The second barrier is that the public sector is characterized by siloed organizational structures that might prevent the development of collaborative work, whether it is cross-departmental or cross-organizational. And we found that in the case of Portugal, they've addressed this in one way, which is they've established a inter-ministerial collaborative group where different organizations, different ministries work on circular economy issues, whether it is for public policy, but also for their internal efforts. And finally, the public sector is also characterized by political cycles. They might block their organization to define longer term goals that are necessary for a transition towards circular economy. And so again, we found that in the case of Portugal, they've addressed this in a way that in this interministerial coordination group, they've appointed people that are from the more technical, administrative or operational level so that they can stay in this group regardless of the government in place. So that was it for a brief overview of the current practice of circular economy in the public sector. So now I'll hand over to Ana Diaz for the insight in the private sector. Thank you.
Thank you, Natasha. I think it's my turn now. So next slide, please. So I'm Ana Diaz. I'm based at University of Graz, and I'm researching within work package 2 of CRESTing. In our case, the goal of our research was to understand private sector implementation of circular economy. And the first finding that we arrived at was that there's a lack of focus on implementation on circular economy literature. So there's a bunch of conceptual papers, but there's little insight on what are the changes that companies need to apply in their processes in order to integrate circularity. More specifically, we were interested in understanding how to integrate circular economy in the product development process because it's highly determinant, but for the sustainability outcomes of a newly designed or a redesigned product or service. And therefore, we interviewed with 15 product developers that were engaged in sustainable product development practices, and then we identified several barriers that hinder circular economy implementation. The first one is that the implementation process happens at the last phases of the product development, and this hinders a more transformational approach towards sustainability. So the changes are decided when the product is almost completely designed, and therefore only incremental improvements can be done. Secondly, the audience who is quite familiarized with circular economy, we are aware that it's operationalized into a series of strategies, and these strategies are not operational enough so that designers and design engineers can directly use them. So they need to be translated into design guidelines. And therefore, this is an additional step. Also, there's a little integration of circular economy indicators in evaluation routines, which also prevents circular economy evaluation, and lack of life cycle information along the product life, which prevents to understand whether what's the actual fate of a product that's designed for circular economy, and what are the actual environmental and social impacts attached. Last but not least, there's also a lack of circular economy culture, which very often manifests in a lack of engagement with different stakeholders besides the company that's implementing. And therefore, this kind of collaborative, more social-oriented approach towards circularity does not happen in reality. Next slide, please. Okay, so in the second phase of our research, we identified 24 instances of circular economy implementation. And there, from these instances, we derived 6 main factors that take place in the implementation process, meaning 6 main decisions or actions that need to take place during product development so that circular economy is effectively implemented. These are summarized in the picture on the left. And then for each of these 6 factors, we identified up to 8 different conditions under which these factors might take place. So to be specific, for instance, one of the steps is to derive circular economy design guidelines. Therefore, this would be one factor. And then we identified 8 different conditions under which these activities might take place, meaning 8 different kinds of guidelines or design guideline focus. So by structuring the 6 main factors and also a limited number of conditions for each factors, we've structured a complex phenomenon, which is a product development for circular economy, into a discrete number of variables. And this, we believe, has 2 main applications. One that's clearly descriptive, and another one that's more prescriptive. Next slide, please. Sorry, I think one slide has been skipped. Here, yeah, perfect. So the descriptive one, in the bottom of the slide, you can see a small version of the morphological fields that we derived with all of the conditions. And this we have been used as a categorization element in order to identify how different types of implementation process configurations that are taking place in private sector organizations. And the main takeaway here is that the corporate sustainability strategy has a very strong influence on how circular economy is implemented during product development. This is relevant because sometimes development and design is discussed apart from strategic management, but actually there's a strong influence. So we propose it should be discussed together. And we've mainly identified 4 different implementation processes, more conservative strategic approaches with strategic intent, but not very innovative implementation actions. Second, we've also identified extroverted strategic companies who are very much focused on collaboration and exchange, but very little focus on sustainability. So in this case, circular economy is not regarded as a means towards sustainability. In the third case, we've identified conventional visionary approaches, which means companies that really have come up with innovative solutions, but always prioritizing a market opportunity or an economic incentive. And last but not least, we've identified systemic visionary approaches, which are innovative and have a very strong focus on sustainability. Next slide, please. And last but not least, before I also said that our findings have also some prescriptive value. And the thing is, with an overall field of different conditions under which companies can implement circular economy, this can be used by practitioners as building blocks for their own strategy implementation process. And therefore, we have developed an interactive version of the morphological box that we are now using in product planning settings, which is the process before product development, in order to roadmap implementation processes for circular economy strategies during design. And yeah, if there's any company watching interested in testing our solution, feel free to reach out. And yeah, I think the main take away message from our research is that not only we have to define what circular economy is or what circular products are, but also we have to describe what are the changes and what are the actions that companies have to decide internally in order to drive the circular economy. Thanks a lot. Now I will hand it to my colleagues from Work Package 2. And yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Anna. Thank you very much. Can we go, please, to the next slide? So my name is Rupert Baumgartner, working at the University of Graz in Austria, and I'm introducing the second question now. I'm leading the Work Package 2 about private sector engagement with the circular economy, and we have here included also the public sector engagement. First of all, I want to apologize for the quality of the slides. There is a reduced quality on the live Zoom. The recorded version should be better, and we will provide, I think, also the presentations afterwards. But maybe these technical issues could also be solved during the time now. Yeah, circular economy and public-private sector organization. So circular economy is a key for us in our understanding for the transition towards a climate-friendly, just and sustainable societies. And what we need for that is a radical dematerialization and substitution. And what we are looking into with this question is how can public and private sector organizations increase their engagement with the circular economy in order to support also then this transition. Starting point is here that we have a clear vision, or the organization has a clear vision about circular economy, integrating different aspects. So finding the balance between the global approach of a circular economy and the regional needs and requirements, taking into account also territorial and local aspects. Also the question of how public sector organizations play here a role within their own activities, but also as an enabler and driver helping the private sector to do so. Answers for these questions are provided by Thomas Santamaria, by Estefania Belgaido and Henrike Töge. And what their research will show is that there are some main factors for doing so. So starting with such a circular economy vision, Thomas will speak about how to innovate business models for circular economy for incumbent firms. Estefania will bring in the perspective then of the local anchoring, so the territorial product service systems approach, helping here in the transformation. And Henrike will shed light on this important role of policy entrepreneurs in helping and shaping the transformation of also public sector organizations. So Thomas, the floor is yours. Next slide, please. Meanwhile.
Thank you very much, Rupert, for the introduction. Yes, my name is Thomas Santamaria, also from University of Graz. And I will share 2 slides with the key outputs of 2 research projects that deal with the engagement of private organizations with the circular economy. So as was previously mentioned, for the needed transition to circular economy, we need more establishment of circular business models in companies in the market. But today that's been rather low. And this is due to different multidimensional barriers that firms are affected by. And trying to look more in depth to this phenomena, we decided to take a multiple case study on 16 circular economy from runner firms to study what are the drivers and barriers for this business model innovation processes. And here we are going to quickly highlight the ones that we found were the most relevant, more common ones. So first, in the side of the barriers, maybe the most common one throughout the cases and situations we've been looking at were legal barriers. For example, very restrictive waste legislations that would prevent, for example, moving some resources from one country to the other, or restrictive product specifications, also regulations. Then also, secondly, that for many of these innovations, there's still a low market demand, still innovative with some niches taking this innovation, but still not in a larger scale. Even related, also related to that was the financial uncertainty that related to these business model innovations. So, of course, firms were worried about the risks that these innovations could pose to their future returns. And also related to that, it's the next one, the short-term shareholder orientation, which was very common, particularly in these large incumbent firms. Not so much for example, in a different study where we look at startups. And also related to larger firms, this organizational inertia was also a big barrier. But by that I refer to this internal resistance to change due to the past success of a previous model, a legacy model, in these cases a linear model. And then finally, also the lack of internal competences, lack of knowledge or understanding of the circular economy, or maybe the technologies behind it. But in this study, we also looked at the drivers. So what motivates these firms to engage with business model innovation for the circular economy? And the two most common ones were first business growth. So the possibility to enter new markets, to increase new sales and increase revenue, and also to reduce costs, to make a more efficient process, basically, which is most of the time the entry point for circular economy in many organizations. Also, they need to adapt to changing customer needs. So, for example, more demand for sustainable products and processes. Also, the opportunity to use new technologies, new digital technologies, most of the cases, the potential of Industry 4.0. And explode this through circular economy applications. And last but not least, as Anna was saying in the previous presentation, the impact of corporate strategy, particularly sustainability strategy, that can lead to circular economy innovation. Next slide, please. And then we were also really wondering, all right, now we understand a little bit better how this works, but how does the innovation process happen in the practice? And in a multiple case study with 10 firms that we looked into in more depth, we were able to identify 26 best practices, we call it here for simplicity, that we collated under the perspective of the dynamic capabilities into these three main groups of sensing, seizing, and reconfiguring. While sensing refers to identifying external and internal threats and opportunities for innovation. Sensing is about transforming these opportunities into actual action, and in this case, into new business models. And reconfiguring refers to this continuous alignment and realignment of resources to implement this new innovation. So in the sensing part here, we highlight first the need of understanding the needs of customers and key stakeholders. That was particularly relevant for innovations focused on short loops of the circular economy, for example, like reuse and repair. Secondly, the very, very important capability of adopting a life cycle perspective, so understanding your innovation from throughout the life through the life of the product and through also its impact throughout the value chain. That led to many identifications of big opportunities or threats, and also the implementation of environmental management tools such as life cycle analysis, sustainability reporting, or even some environmental management systems. And something that was also common in all cases was the application of research and development to explore innovations. And once you have these innovations and opportunities or threats, key capabilities to transform this into actual innovation, business model innovations, was first something too that we find in almost all cases was the capability to design new sustainable value propositions that have a positive environmental and social outcomes. And with that also to design a business model around this value proposition. Thirdly, the capability of identifying and engaging stakeholders throughout the value chain. This was critical, particularly for innovations focused on longer loops of the circular economy, such as recycling, for example. And finally, also the critical need to develop a sustainability strategy and an organizational culture. If you don't have that, you wouldn't be able to mobilize your organization. And finally, just to mention two relevant practices in this more reconfiguring stage was this capability of integrating and connecting and coordinating stakeholders and partners in the business ecosystem. And that's something that would change throughout the innovation process. And very important also the capability of experimenting, of identifying your key assumptions, testing them, changing your hypothesis and your business model, your products in a very quick and lean format. And with that, I can now give the floor to Stefania, who's going to provide this territorial perspective. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Thomas. Can we switch to the next slide? Good morning, everyone. My name is Estefania Delgadillo. I am part of Work Package 2, and I am based at the University of Technology in Troyes in France. So, and I'm going to present the findings of the circular economy engagement through the territorially anchored product service systems. And PSS are value propositions that are oriented towards satisfying users' needs through the delivery of functions or performance instead of the ownership of products. These are among the most promising strategies for transitioning towards circular economy. In order to enhance the sustainability potential of PSS, we investigated the benefits of developing territorially anchored offerings as innovations that can bring benefits for both companies and territories. So this approach contributes to companies' competitive strategies as the geographical embeddedness reduces the complexity of the value exchanges. It enhances the creation of shorter enclosed material loops, which decreases the transaction cost and environmental impact. It also expands the business network boundaries, which is essential for contributing towards the legitimation of the innovation. From a territorial perspective, the PSS can contribute to the sustainability transition paths of territories as it enhances the development of heterogeneous actor networks, which are focused on developing local value creation and allowing an alignment between the offering and the local societal needs. Next slide, please. Despite the well-developed knowledge on the PSS design domain, there is a current lack of approaches that enhances this territorial anchorage of PSS. Thus, we have developed a conceptualization PSS method called SISTER, which aims to support early PSS design phases, and it adopts a multi-stakeholder and a multi-level approach. From a multi-stakeholder perspective, we integrate the actors from the industry, but also the public, societal, and academic sectors. And from the multi-level perspective, we analyze the system from a company, value chain, socio-technical system, and territorial levels. So the main objectives of this design support tool is to help organizations to understand the different system levels the offering belongs to, and to identify the key stakeholder relationships and sustainability issues, also to explore the tangible and the intangible value opportunities, and to develop concepts that tackle both customers and territorial needs. Next slide, please. The sister method consists in 5 models and 13 steps, and it has been tested in 2 companies in France and 2 companies in Taiwan. The first model consists in understanding the current system, the sustainability issues, and the value opportunities. The second model is more focused on envisioning a PSS in a sustainable territory and setting up a design objective. The third model is focused on the ideation phase, where participants define the unit of satisfaction of the system and explore the different innovation strategies at a product, business model, and territorial levels. The conceptualization model is done through the development of a simplified business model canvas and the definition of the main functions and subfunctions of the PSS system and the actors and the resources that are needed to deploy the functions. The last stage is an evaluation, where we see how the PSS provides value to different stakeholders, and also at the level of the value network and at a territorial scale. Next slide, please. Our research highlights 3 important pillars for the sustainable circular economy implementation in private sectors organizations. So the first pillar is product and service design, as it is estimated that 80% of the social and environmental impacts are decided during this process. The second pillar is business model innovation, as companies need to develop circular business models that pursue modes of value creation and offerings that can slow and reduce material resource flows. These 2 pillars are connected through the competitive strategy of companies. And the third pillar are territorial resources, as integrating them, we can enhance the alignment of the offerings with the local characteristics and the context of the territories where these business models are implemented. The business models and the territorial resources are connected through the local approach of production and consumption systems, while the territorial resources and the design pillars are connected through the territorial value creation, which implies an involvement of designers on more strategic decisions concerning corporate sustainability. So it is important that companies consider and try to balance these pillars into their organizations in order to pursue a sustainable circular economy. Now I hand in the word to my colleague, Henrika Droge.
Thank you, Stefania. Very interesting. May I ask you to switch to the next slide? My name is Henrika Droge. I'm part of Work Package 3 on the public sector and circular economy engagement. And I'm a researcher at Nova University in Lisbon. Today, I want to talk about one of our research articles that is on the engagement of individuals in the circular economy and how individuals can actually drive circular economy engagement and implementation. What we did is we looked into we had the Portuguese government as a case study, and we did a triangulation on a literature review, interviews, and policy document review. And we observed policy entrepreneurs that drove the emergence of the Circular Economy Action Plan in Portugal. Policy entrepreneurs, what is this? It's a concept that emerged in the 1980s, and it's described as people who are willing to invest their resources, such as energy, time, reputation, and sometimes even money, to realize policies or topics in their favor. It's not only limited to the public sector, but we observed it in the public sector here. What can they actually do? They can open and exploit policy windows. And it's actually important to mention both, because these policy entrepreneurs, they can put topics on the agenda, saying like raising awareness and opening the box for a topic, but they can also drive implementation of topics. It has been observed across different policy areas, also in sustainable development, but also in completely different areas. This phenomenon has also been observed on many different levels. You see it on the local level, regional level, national level. And it can happen, or this phenomenon or policy entrepreneurship can happen by one person alone, but it can also happen in small teams. And I will explain to you in a second what we observed in the case of Portugal. These people can be from inside or outside the government. And as I said, they can trigger and support disruptive circular responses to current societal problems. May I kindly ask you to switch to the next slide? So, yeah, now it's a bit complicated. I'm sorry again for the bad quality. It's very hard for you to read this slide, but I try to walk you through it. So what we saw is that policy entrepreneurs, in the case of the Portuguese government, can be important actors to drive circular economy policy making to foster a transition to more circularity. We observed in our specific case 2 different types of policy entrepreneurs. It was the agenda setters, so the circular economy initiators. In our case, this was one particular person. And we also observed a second group, which was a small group of people, the circular economy implementers, that were more focused on then after the initiation, after the topic was already on the agenda, driving the implementation for it. And what you could observe is that these people have specific characteristics or specific ways of approaching these things. And today I want to talk a bit about the strategies that these people used. So first, starting with the circular economy initiator, the actor that put the topic of circular economy on the agenda of the Portuguese policy scene. And what happened is there was the generation of a policy vision. Like the topic emerged, like in the discussion, it was brought up by this person. This person became proactively an advisor to the Portuguese Minister of the Environment and really generated this policy vision of a circular economy. What you also need to do, what's one of the strategy is the problem and solution framing, it's called, is actually positioning circular economy as a solution to the problem of sustainable development. Especially in the field of circular economy, you can see that it's also competing with other strategies and with other ways of increasing sustainable development. So this is also what this particular person did. Another strategy, and this is quite interesting, because also very hands-on, it's called policy venue shopping, which means that you actually need to find occasions to place your topic on the agenda, which is meetings of the industrial players, meetings of members of parliaments. So you proactively attend these meetings and place your topic continuously on the agenda of these people. And what is also important for this policy initiation and the circular economy initiation that we observed was teamwork. You cannot do this alone. The policy entrepreneur did not do this alone. He or she activated people to collaborate with her. Then we observed this second group of implementers. So when the topic of circular economy was already on the agenda, so people had awareness about it, people understood what is happening. These people were developing or pushing the execution strategy. So they were developing a strategy, the idea of the action plan in this case, to actually bring circular economy to life, because it's nice having a vision, it's nice having a plan, but you need to make it happen, right? The other thing that they really fostered, this little group of circular economy implementers, was pilot projects. So they tried to generate quick wins, so small, fast projects to showcase that the circular economy can help and can solve these above mentioned problems. Lastly, they, and this is actually a good transition to the next topic, they also implemented and fostered the evaluation of these actions that they were promoting, and to provide a framework to constantly develop and evaluate these circular economy measures that they were introducing. Across all these stages that I just mentioned, there are also 3 strategies that are continuously important. One of them is the communication. So throughout all stages of bringing circular economy on the agenda and trying to implement it, it's super important to communicate your aims and your tasks to the relevant people. Also timing. These people were very strategic in when they put certain things on the agenda. And lastly, it's networking. It's also a big thing a very important thing to network with the right people, as I said, with people from the industry, with people from the ministers and companies and NGOs. So yeah, this is what we observed in the Portuguese case. It has been observed in other sustainable development contexts in other cases. And I think it actually provides quite a hands-on view on how individuals can actually make a difference in this topic, which I find very interesting when we are looking at how can we actually drive circular economy across different areas. And as the policy area is a big sphere, it's very interesting to see that individual action can actually make a difference. So with saying this, I would like to hand over to the next group on the assessment of circular economy. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Enrica. Good morning to everyone. My name is Andrea Raggi. I'm from the University Gabriele D'Annunzio in Pescara, Italy. And within the Cresting project, I have led the work package 5 on sustainability metrics of circular practices and systems. So I'm going to introduce now the last part of this session. As we have seen, circularity can be considered as an approach aimed at reducing the use of resources and the generation of waste. It is generally taken for granted that all circular practices in any context are necessarily more environmentally sound. However, this might not be always the case, at least not for all the environmental issues considered. Furthermore, besides the environmental dimension of sustainability, the social and economic aspects should also be included. So, what's the relation between circularity and sustainability? Can we measure the actual sustainability of circular systems, evaluating their potential impacts, and how are existing approaches and methods suitable, or they need to be adapted, or new ones are needed? How can we best communicate the results of the assessment to stakeholders? These are some of the questions that led the activities of Work Package 5. And under the guidance of their supervisors, and also in collaboration with some partner organizations, to which we are very grateful, the involved ESRs, Eric, Anna, and Caitlin, have investigated these issues both by carrying out their respective projects in parallel and by actively integrating with each other, for example, through a survey and interviews conducted in collaboration. So I'm giving them the floor to briefly illustrate the main results of their efforts. Please, Eric, it's your turn. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Andrea, for this great introduction. My name is Erik Roos Lindgren, and I'm based at the University of Messina in Italy, supervised by Professor Roberta Salomone. And as Andrea already explained, I'm part of Work Package 5 together with Anna and Caitlin. And one of the questions that we investigate is indeed the assessment of circular economy and of the sustainability of a circular economy. And because Anna and Caitlin are looking at these perspectives from different angles, I would just like to frame this topic and present some of our results. So first of all, circular economy assessment is very diverse. And what we found through a literature review is indeed that we see this heterogeneity in terms of what's included in assessment, so the scale, in terms of what kind of dimensions of sustainability are included, so the scope, and also to what extent existing circular economy assessment methods refer to already existing sustainability assessment methods. And that is something we wanted to investigate further, which is also why we set up this survey project, which Andrea briefly mentioned, and had interviews with different companies that were engaged with a circular economy in the Netherlands and in Italy. And one of our hypotheses was that the ambiguity that Andrea also explained between the relation between circular economy and sustainability also leads to ambiguity on what actually circular economy assessment is, and this great diversity in approaches. And we collected some empirical evidence on what companies engaged with a circular economy are doing in this respect. And we found out that companies are making use of existing tools such as life cycle assessment, which was also highlighted in previous presentations. And we find that this tool could have a specifically valuable role in the assessment of circular economy, specifically its sustainability impacts. Next slide, please. Thank you. And in this context, we interviewed companies as well. And these are, this is a visualization of some of the results of our interviews, asking companies, what is your interpretation of the relation between circular economy and sustainability? And as you can see, these are two specific views. And if we focus on the left interpretation, we see here that these participants saw circular economy to lead to sustainability, at least to have the aim to lead to sustainability. So we see that circular economy is a bit more narrow. It's a bit more about resources, about value retention of these resources, and about environmental aspects, while sustainability is much wider, also including social aspects and has a more holistic, community-oriented focus. Then for the participants that had the right interpretation, the difference between sustainability and circular economy was actually not so great, and perhaps also not so important. They saw it more as sort of semantic, scientific discussion. And they also mentioned, well, it depends on the specific business context in which you use these two concepts. Next slide, please. Could you please move to the, thank you. So what we see following this interpretation that circular economy solutions have the aim to lead to more sustainable practices, we also developed an initial framework, a strategic framework to assist companies with their assessment of the sustainability of their to-be introduced circular practices. And this we called the SCIA framework, Strategic Circular Economy Impact Assessment. And we specifically focused on the strategic level because we saw in literature that this was the connection that hasn't really been focused on so much. So sort of the connection between management literature and sustainability and circular economy practices. First, we designed it based on our previous results, also based on some of the interviews and on a critical literature review. And then we also validated this framework, firstly with external experts from academia and consultancy organizations. In a later stage, also with focus groups with the intended participants or the end users. So different companies that were eager to assess the sustainability impacts of their circular solutions. And then in the final stage, we tested this framework in practice with one of our secondment companies, our company partners. And this is a visualization of a simplified version of the framework. So indeed, as Henrika already mentioned, having a vision is very important. So that is part of the point of departure, sort of having the recognition that a decision needs to be made in terms of assessment. Then identifying within your system what the resource flows are. And you can use different existing methods for that, for example, material flow analysis. And then connecting these resource flows to their specific sustainability impacts on these three sustainability domains. So the environmental impact is important, but also the economic and social dimensions. Based on what you see in terms of impact and how they are distributed over these different resource flows, you can focus your circular economy solutions. So this diagnosis phase, the third step, really allows you to prioritize your resource flows. And then developing a circular economy strategy or solution will, of course, directly influence your resource flows again. And that is, it's hard to see in the picture, but that's why there's this feedback loop always between the development phase, your resource flows, and the impact assessment. And optionally, the last step of this framework would be to use multi-criteria decision analysis to select the best circular economy strategy to implement as a company. And some of the foundations of this framework, so the holistic nature, also including the social dimension of sustainability, will be explained in more detail by my colleague, Anna Walker. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Erik, for this nice bridge. Hello, everybody. I'm Anna Walker from the University of Gabriele D'Annunzio in Pescara. My supervisor is Andrea Raggi. And I would like to talk a bit more today about assessing sustainability impacts in circular interfirm networks. Because circular economy and the circular economy practices of companies are inherently relational. So that would mean that more than one company is usually involved in these kind of practices. And this is why, if we think about the assessment of circular economy along a product supply chain, we automatically also have to think about the assessment involving more than one companies and involving a network of companies in that sense. And these kind of companies, they need to work together and they need to collect data together or even conceptualize the data together in order to make sure that they have a sound sustainability assessment in that sense. And an interesting factor that we found there in our research, also related to the research that Erik and Andrea had mentioned before with the interviewing and surveying of Italian and Dutch companies, is that interfirm collaboration, which is based on trust, increases the likelihood that there is going to be some kind of sustainability assessment, while at the same time, having an assessment also increases the need for collaboration. So you have this kind of mutual reinforcement between collaboration and relationship. And all of this is integrated within the social relationships. So this is something which we have found companies have not been focusing very much on. So mostly when in the case that companies were conducting some kind of assessment, it was mostly focusing on the environmental dimension. And we asked companies, what do you think is actually, is it important to do a social assessment of circular economy practices? And is it different? Does it belong to circularity or does it belong to sustainability? And companies, most of the companies, they said that the social dimension itself, as Erik also pointed out before, is not necessarily considered part of circular economy, but of course it requires attention because it affects, because the social dimension is affected by circular economy practices. And so what we have found was that that less than half of the people that we've interviewed, of these 43 people, have actually implemented some kind of assessment. And most of the assessment that they implemented was more on a qualitative level. So it was more a kind of a narrative evaluation. It was not really quantitative in that sense. And the main issues that they had with applying some kind of social assessment, the main barriers they had was the kind of limited standardization and the complexity of the social assessment, because social issues are inherently context related. They're very much value based. And for that reason, they're hard to standardize. And what could be done, however, or what is already being done, is that there are some norms and conventions that can guide the direction, but then the ultimate indicators that are being chosen, the strategy that is being chosen still needs to be legitimized by some kind of stakeholder involvement to make sure that it's also anchored in the context and takes into account the stakeholders that will ultimately be affected by circular economy practices. But what we would also advocate for is that there's not necessarily a need to develop new approaches, because there are already existing frameworks and methodologies out there, such as the social life cycle assessment, which also has this life cycle approach to assessment. But that the life cycle assessment itself, most companies were not familiar with it, even though they were maybe familiar with the So they were not familiar with the social life cycle assessment, while they were very much familiar with the environmental life cycle assessment. So the diffusion of the assessment has not yet really taken place. And what they also said is that even if when they knew about it, it was just, for them, it was too complex and still too unstandardized, and they did not really have a business case for it. While for the environmental assessment, there was more of a peer pressure and also consumers demanding for it. While on the social side, there was not really, as I mentioned, the business case for actually doing some kind of social assessment. Next slide, please. Here I'm jumping to another part of our research, which we have done on comparing two different circular systems, actually, and how this assessment can be integrated within the context that it's actually taking place. So this study, it's about a case study which I've done with Ecoinnovazione, one of our partners, and we are comparing two cases. One case is on the top picture you can see a single-use crockery from bioplastics, and on the bottom picture you have the reuse crockery from ceramics. And we're looking at the environmental impacts over the life cycle of these two systems within a canteen. So which of these two is more environmentally sustainable? What is important to look at is that, or to keep in mind, and this is also one of the reasons why we came up with this assessment, is that at the moment there is the Single-Use Plastics Directive in the EU, which is including bioplastics within the ban of single-use plastics, which they have of certain products. So most of the products which you can see on the top would actually not be able to be sold anymore. They should be banned. But this has been strongly contested by the Italian government, because 66% of bioplastics sold within the EU until now came from Italy, or is coming from Italy. So there is a big industry behind this. And what we did, we applied an LCA to both of these systems, and we used the actor network theory to contextualize the life cycle assessment and the results. What we find is that we have the bioplastics lobby claiming that bioplastics crockery is circular because you can compost it. And on the other hand, you have the multi-utility companies and the recycling companies who say, well, that bioplastics, even though it is in theory compost, or it is compost certified, it's actually not being composted because the bioplastics is indistinguishable from normal plastics, and the composting cycles are way too long. So they actually take it out and incinerate it. So there is, in reality, actually no circle. So we took this into account in the modeling of the LCA, and we compared the environmental impact of those two systems, and we found that the reuse system is superior environmentally across all the impact categories, which actually was to be expected. So we saw what is actually the issue here, because the issue is actually the trade-off between the socioeconomic and the environmental dimension. It didn't really have anything to do with the current arguing of the bioplastics lobby that single-use plastic is circular and that Italy has a virtuous composting supply chain, which was their argument. That was not really the issue. The issue is that probably if politicians are going into the direction of prioritizing the environmental impact and ban single-use plastics, they need to ensure that people who are working in this sector, they're taken care of. And this is actually at the moment not yet even part of the discussion. So this is why we say that the LCA results, they need to be contextualized with the relevant actors' interests to kind of look where can we actually take decisions that lead to more sustainable outcomes. And in this case, we need to take care of the social issues, because the environmental answer is actually quite clear. Thank you very much. And now we go to Caitlin.
Okay, thanks, Anna. Yes, okay. Good morning, everyone. So as mentioned, my name is Caitlin Amchuku, and I'm based at Universidade Aberta in Lisbon in Portugal, and supervised by Professor Sandra Cairo. So my position within the Cresting project is not only looking at the sustainability assessment of circular economy, but also more specifically the integration of circular economy within corporate sustainability reporting. So this morning I will highlight some findings as well as some considerations moving forward. So as a first point, an entry point to this project, we wanted to look at what was the current guidance available for companies producing sustainability reports and wanting to integrate circular economy practices. So through a literature review and content analysis of the main available disclosure frameworks and approaches, we found that the majority are currently not integrating circular economy. Generally, it's not there yet. However, the sustainability standards from the Global Reporting Initiative, or GRI, are including circular economy as a voluntary qualitative indicator, specifically with respect to their waste standards. So second, we wanted to look at how are companies currently reporting circular economy? Are there any innovative trends, or what challenges can we already see? So pointing out two common elements of sustainability reports, we looked at references and links with the SDG framework, as well as any targets or indicators for circular economy being reported. So looking at the SDGs first, which I'm sure everyone is aware is a very renowned, broad and holistic framework for sustainability, we found that companies are linking circular economy with the SDGs in their reports, not only with SDG 12 of responsible consumption and production, which is possibly expected, but also with others such as SDG 13, climate action, but also SDG 17, partnerships for the goals, which I think highlights the extremely collaborative nature required for circular economy implementation. However, as a general trend being discussed within general sustainability reporting, it's often being talked about these claims of SDG washing or blue washing. So when companies are just sort of putting the labels of the SDGs in their reports or in their communication and making claims about positively contributing towards SDGs without sort of backing this up. So as a consideration, how can we ensure moving forward that this is not going to be transferred to circular economy activities or performance, where we might see companies just using the correct terminology of circular economy, but without actually positively contributing. So as one way we can look at the performance or the indicators being reported for circular economy. So within, essentially we looked at the sustainability reports of 94 European sustainability ranked companies. And it's difficult to see on the slides, but essentially we found that only 1/3 of these companies are reporting both targets and indicators for circular economy. So if we look at the two goals, the first here we have are the targets or the goals or the ambitions that the companies were linking with circular economy. And the second, we have the performance indicators. We can see that the blue portion of the chart is connected with these higher ranked circular economy value retention strategies, such as reduce, refuse, reuse, and the lower end of the scale at gray and yellow are the lower ranked circular economy value retention options like recycling or just references to the linear economy. And essentially what we can see is that this distribution is uneven. In a way, these companies are more likely to sort of aim high and have these high ambitions for highly ranked circular economy strategies, but they are not measuring the performance on these targets. More often, yes, reporting recycling, basically. So moving forward, how can we not only ensure that companies are held accountable for the impacts of their circular economy strategies, but how can we support them to make ambitious targets, but also to measure the performance towards these targets in a way which demonstrates the improvements in a circular economy context? So next slide, please. So we also looked at the challenges or barriers towards circular economy assessment, and we looked at that in two contexts. So first in the private sector with my colleagues Anna and Eric, and we also looked in the public sector, so work done by my colleague Henrica in the context of the Portuguese public sector. And we found very similar results, essentially that specifically around the fact that there is no benchmark or standard currently for the assessment of circular economy, as well as this idea or this concept of assessment fatigue, that companies and practitioners are already required to perform a number of assessments. So now having to do another one for circular economy, how can they have the resources? This is a significant barrier. And as a final consideration is I wanted to comment on the current climate surrounding circular economy assessment and reporting that it's becoming increasingly mandatory to assess and report the impacts of circular economy practices. And we see the inclusion of circular economy in national and international policies, such as the European taxonomy regulation. So we have this paradox of standardization versus the tailoring or tailor-made assessment approaches for circular economy, which both have advantages and disadvantages. Of course, the standardization of assessment and reporting of circular economy will help to improve comparability of corporate performance or corporate ambitions. But on the same sense, we found that the actual process of developing assessment approaches for circular economy resulted in a significant positive learning process for the organization that then, as a side effect, also helped to distribute and integrate circular economy within organizations at a wider level, and as increase the significance of circular economy within the corporate strategy. So essentially in the next few years, we will see a number of opportunities to support companies to assess and report the impacts of their circular economy strategies in a transparent way in the context of sustainability. So thank you. Now we'll pass it back to Professor Andrea Raggi to conclude.
Okay, thank you very much. So we have come to the end of this session. Many thanks to all the speakers we have listened to for their very clear and stimulating presentations indeed. So it's time to briefly try and draw some conclusions and recommendations as regards engaging with and for a circular economy. Public and private sector organizations should acknowledge that this is an innovation challenge. In this context, engagement means developing and implementing new circular business models, closely collaborating with stakeholders, especially on the regional level. We have seen interfirm network collaborations, and exploiting the potential of policy entrepreneurs. But for doing so, it is essential to have the bigger picture in mind, that is to focus on high value retention strategies like refuse, reduce, and reuse, while considering basic sustainability principles. We have seen that several barriers to the CE implementation have been identified, such as the organizational, financial, cultural, legal, political ones. But however, important drivers are in place: policies, changes, market demands, new technologies, growth, opportunities, and so on. To further increase the uptake of CE practices, a focus on changing organizational culture and structures is required, both in the private sector and in public organizations, where CE implementation is currently limited to very few practices, as we have seen. Engaged individuals in public and private sector organizations are fundamental to drive the change towards circularity. Regional and local policy tools are needed for enabling territorial ecosystems implementing sustainable CE-oriented innovations. As regards the relationship between sustainability and circularity, we have seen that a certain ambiguity has emerged. According to some, the latter can be seen as an evolution of the former. According to others, circularity is a subset of sustainability, at least partially, in the sense that non or less sustainable circular solutions may also be identified. Circularity measurement focuses on resource flows. This should not replace sustainability assessment. No new assessment approaches or tools are needed, however. It is recommended to further develop existing and consolidated ones, such as life cycle-based methods for assessing sustainability. These are generally widespread and standardized. Moreover, they have the advantage of being holistic, multi-criteria, and scientifically robust. The other side of the coin is their complexity. These are resource-intensive methods which generally require advanced methodological skills and large amounts of reliable data, often difficult to collect. Their routine application on a case-by-case basis, which would be recommended, as we have seen, might be expensive and time-consuming, which can conflict with policy needs and prompt decision-making. In some way, the circularity assessment could therefore represent a preliminary step for companies because it would allow to identify resource flows. So research should work towards capability building of companies regarding the assessment of CE practices and systems. Moreover, reliable specific databases, also referred to regional contexts, could help the further spread of these tools and the accuracy of the results, which is obviously of paramount importance for sound decision making. So, thank you, and I'm handing over to Professor Deutz for questions and answers, provided we have still time for that.
Thank you very much, Andrea and the team, for your very interesting presentations, which we have enjoyed here, and I hope that everyone watching has. We do apologize for some issues with the resolution of the slides at the beginning. I believe that you can now follow on YouTube, where the resolution should be much greater. When we post our videos at some seem to be convenient point, they should be at the high resolution as well. We are running a few minutes late, and we do want to start again on time, but I think perhaps we could have time from one question that my colleague Heather has been monitoring from the chat.
Hi everyone, so this is just one question from Anne from Leeds University. So this was posed just after Henrika's presentation, so perhaps you could take the lead, but if anyone else has a comment, please jump in. She says, did you find any steps in terms of building a collaboration network for initiating and implementing circular economy?
Thank you for the question. And yes, as I said, there are, like, it's super important to, this networking aspect is very, very important, and the communication aspect. So I think Natasha already mentioned in her presentation that in Portugal, this circular economy coordination group was created. And this was a key factor of driving the topic. So the collaboration network that was created here was very, very important. So I can say yes to your question in our specific case, right?
Were there any specific steps involved in creating that network that you could point to for others maybe trying to create a similar situation?
Mm-hmm. I think, like, as I said, like, there are these steps or the strategies that are relevant across, like, all stages of the, you call it, policy cycle. And I think some of these things, like venue shopping or the right timing, are particularly important. So I think these are strategies that you need to, or that are important to follow in order to create this network. Again, said in our specific case, this is what we observed.
Great. Is there anybody? Did anybody else want to add anything? Any of the other panelists? No? Okay. I think we'll end it there for now. We also had a question asking about publications from the project. So I can just direct people to our website. There's a full list of publications in the output section. And I think we'll leave it there for now. We'll see you back at 11:30. Yep. Yes. All right. Thank you so much to all of our panelists.